came from Japan in the beginning. They were very impressed with Japanese, not with Japanese, with San Diego comic convention, with Comic Con. In Japan, they didn't have anything like that really, and it's ironic that the whole the phenomenon in Japan and the conventions that are held in Japan are partly inspired by what manga artists saw when they came here to the United States and visited San Diego, and also some of them visited science fiction, Star Trek conventions, that sort of thing. And actually the whole cosplay thing, masquerading the cosplay thing, that actually comes from the United States. It comes from Japanese manga artists and others seeing what's being done in the United States in terms of costume events and so forth, and taking that back to Japan and turning it into something sort of uniquely Japanese, and then that being reimported to the United States. And very few people are aware of how that happened, but it is true. It was actually what's done in Japan in terms of cosplay was originally inspired by what was being done in the United States, and of course now cosplay has been reimported in the United States and taken on a life of its own and become one of the sort of pillars of the anime fan community. I mean, it's just wonderful. I see a lot of the cosplay at the conventions, and it's just great. It's a little different than what's done in Japan, and it's got a life of its own. It's become a kind of a pillar for a community. It's just fabulous.
Yeah, I just saw today someone forwarded me a link to a new social media network for fans of cosplay.
Yeah.
Purely for cosplay. What a great idea. I mean,
and I think the cosplay thing is just fabulous, and it's also pulled in a lot of people into the anime fan scene who otherwise might not even participate. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who enjoy cosplay who, they never read manga, and they probably don't even watch that much anime. They just love the cosplay, and it's also pulled in a lot of young women, so that the mix in anime conventions now in America is, it's so wonderful. There's everybody there now. It used to be, it's all these kind of males with pot bellies running around, and it's a totally different environment than it is today, and it's much nicer today. It's wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
I mean, how have you seen, anime and manga fandom change over the years over here in America, especially? I mean, going from very much an underground thing now to where it is it's still underground in a lot of ways, but just it's so different.
Well, it's really, I think, in the United States to be mainstreamed in many ways, at least compared to when the con started here. In the beginning, like I said, fans were, the vast majority were males. It's broadened now, and you see not only manga fans and anime fans and sort of otaku, traditional kind of otaku people, but it's a very representative swath of Americans. I've been to Otakon many times, and I always really enjoy it. When I go to the cons, I just think it's great that you see all these people and they're interacting and they're having a lot of fun, and it's a very kind of unique environment where people feel very safe and they're having fun and enjoying themselves, and they can enjoy the cosplay and they can enjoy trading information, and it's a very healthy subculture. I think for parents it's a great subculture for the teenagers, for their teenage children to get involved in, and it's interesting to see. It's a very interesting mixture of foreign influences and American influences, and actually right now I think the cons in America are one of the sustaining forces of the anime community, because one thing the web has done is it's fragmented the fan community to a certain extent, because everybody has access to this material now. The cons are one place where everybody can get together and maintain a community.
That's an interesting point. And one of the things that confused me for a long time is why cons have remained for so long now that, you don't need to go to the video room, you don't need to go to a lot of these places because you can get all that stuff online. But I think you're absolutely right. It's it's that community feeling of getting in touch, in some cases just with those 5 people that you've only met online, but also just this larger community.
That's right, and I think that's where the cosplay also plays such a huge role, because it is true that you can read the stories, you can watch the anime anywhere, you can watch it at home, you can watch it, while you're in the train with your 3G-enabled iPad 2. You can, you go to Europe, it doesn't matter. You can see all this stuff anywhere you want now. Maybe it's not legal, but you can do it. But to have a community, a real analog sort of a human flesh and blood community, you have to collect somewhere, and the cons make that possible.
Now, one thing that I think is interesting about cons, what was the first American con that you went to?
I believe I went to the very first one here, but I could be wrong about that. I think the first true anime-themed cons, manga-themed cons, were held here in the Bay Area where I live. And my memory is actually getting fuzzy on this, but there was Anime America, and then that split up, and there were 2 competing cons.
Okay.
But I believe I went to the very first ones here in the Bay Area. Before that, there were anime-related groups that had tagged on to American comic book conventions, but they were just a subset of the comic book conventions or even the science fiction conventions. And you had groups like Cartoon Fantasy Organization in L.A., and people who were very instrumental in promoting early fandom, such as Fred Patton and Robin. That's right, and Robin Lydon, and really people who did these heroic things to promote anime and manga awareness. But I believe that the first official anime-dedicated cons were held here in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and I went to. In the beginning, I went to those, and then they split off, and one faction became Funime Kong eventually, I think, and then another faction went down to L.A., where you have Expo, Anime Expo, and that's how it got going. And now, of course, you have cons everywhere. In all the major cities, as far as I know, or at least all the major regions in the United States or North America.
Oh yeah, it's there are dozens. It's stunning.
Yeah, more than dozens probably if you add in the little ones. And not only are there cons, but there are of course clubs in most of the major universities and even many high schools, and it's just the most amazing phenomenon.
So what were those earlier cons like? I mean, smaller, obviously, but how was the content different from what cons are like today?
Well, they're similar to what exists today, and actually the first ones in the San Francisco Bay Area kind of created the template for all subsequent cons. And of course, they took their inspiration from sci-fi and comic book conventions in the United States. So the template was already there. The big difference, of course, between then and now is that people had to rely on a much more analog sort of way of sharing information. So in those days, for anime fans, videotapes were the way to sort of share information with your friends. You actually had to physically copy videotapes, and people were watching 3rd, 4th, 5th generation copies, and then people were referring to TypeScript scenarios and reading along while the animes on a videotape recorder in some hotel room, and everybody's zonked out on caffeine and pizza and staying up all night long, and but it was very much still an analog era. There was no web that was used then. There was no web, but there was no internet that was in wide use then. Although fans were something the universities were starting to use it, and it was a communication tool, but you couldn't send the images back and forth. So people relied heavily on videotapes and sharing videotapes and copying them and spreading the word. And often you'd have one person in the audience who, in hotel rooms, for example, where even if you had a video feed, you'd have somebody who knew some Japanese, and they would be kind of an informal translator, that sort of thing. So it's a very different world. And in the very early cons, of course, if you knew some Japanese, or if you were Japanese and you knew some English, you could become very popular very quickly. But the template was pretty much the same. There were video screenings of animated shows. There were dealers' rooms, and unlike Japan, of course, where the conventions are largely focused on the manga works that have been created by amateur artists in the United States, the focus of cons in the dealer rooms is on selling, merchandise primarily. And then I think even in the very beginning there was a fan art corner. There was a place for fan art, as I recall, and there was cosplay. There were a lot of people in the early days. There were an awful lot of Damba fans in the early days. People dressed up in Rama costumes. But so the template was established very early, and I think it's remained pretty much the same.
That's interesting. What were the panels like? I mean, what sort of topics would they cover?
Well, it was like today. You'd have panels dealing with very esoteric subjects, and of course they got their cue again, I think, from the science fiction panels and from also the comics conventions panels, American Comics Conventions panels. So you had exclusively fan-oriented panels where people would debate, the merits of various works and strengths and weaknesses of various characters and so forth and so on and on and on. People would be debating the most arcane aspects of anime and manga, which robot's stronger than the other one, and that sort of thing. But in the very beginning, there were also guests that were brought over from Japan. Wow. So they were also, very much a draw for the conventions. And they would have their own panels, and I interpreted many of the early ones. For example, when Mr. Tomino came over, at least a couple times I was interpreting for him. So the guests of honor were always a focal point of these conventions, and they still are today.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, and I did want to hit this. And I know we've been going for a while here, but you translated one of the more interesting novels to come over here, in quite a while, the Gundam novelization. And I'm just intensely curious about that one as well, in terms of, again, how on earth did that come over?
That was a really interesting opportunity for me. I was actually friends with Mr. Tomino. I knew him. Of course, he's older than I am, and of course a famous person. But I met him in the context of serving as his interpreter in San Francisco when he was here a long time ago, and I believe it may have been a Japan Society sponsored event, something like that. But I was asked to serve as his interpreter, and I did so. And I got to know him, and he was very kind to me and very friendly to me. So I became friends with him, even though, as I say, he existed on a different level than I did. He was a very famous person, whereas I was and still remain much more grounded here. And then I also was doing a lot of interpreting at the time for indirectly for Lucasfilm. I was interpreting for their master licensee in Japan, so I spent a lot of time out at Lucasfilm interpreting for their Japanese licensees and for their master licensor. So I knew the Lucasfilm people very well, and Ballantine, which was, or Del Rey, I should say, which is an imprint of Ballantine Random House, had an editor named Risa Kessler, I believe, and they had published the Star Wars novels and done enormously well with the Star Wars novels, as you can imagine. They'd made a killing with them. And I think they were looking for a replacement, or not a replacement, but they were looking for something similar that might yield the same result, and they might make another killing. So they, on their own, they saw, or they learned that there were these Gundam novels in Japan, and they'd heard about the Gundam series, the anime series, and they knew how big that was in Japan. And of course, it was the equivalent of Star Wars in Japan. It was huge phenomenon. And Mr. Tomino had authored these 3 novels as part of the first Gundam series. So they thought, well, we'll just translate these. We'll have them translated, and we'll issue them as a series and put them in the same kind of format as the Star Wars novels, and see where it goes, and maybe we'll be lucky again. And then they were looking around for a translator, and they contacted Del Rey. Risa Kessler contacted, I believe it was probably Howard Rothman out at Lucasfilm, who's now, I believe, the vice president. And he gave them my name as very kindly. And then, of course, they also found out later that I knew very well for me, and I was hugely excited to do the translation, and it was a great deal of fun, and I loved doing the translation. Unfortunately, the series did not do so well for Del Rey, because they were expecting something or sales on the order, I think, of the Star Wars novels, and that was a bit optimistic. But actually, by today's standards, for Del Rey, the novels sold very well. They sold, I think, over 75,000 copies. But for Del Rey, that was not successful, and any other publisher today would probably, they would probably commit harakiri. But Del Rey let the books go out of print, and they remained out of print for many, many years. And I kept writing them every year, and I would say, well, have you heard of this phenomenon in the United States called anime? Do you know that anime is growing and growing and growing, and that the Gundam series is becoming more and more popular in the United States? Because, of course, in the beginning, no one in America, other than, hardcore fans, had heard of the series. And I would write them every year, and I would say, you guys should really reprint this series. There's a lot of possibilities now. Not 1991 or 92. I say now is the time. But they didn't get it, and I even got one letter, and they said, well, our information is that anime is decreasing in popularity in America, so we're not going to republish them or reprint them. So they relinquished the rights to the translation graciously, and since I had the rights to the translation as the translator, then I spoke with my friends who had originally been the editor for manga, who in the 1990s is Peter Goodman, and he had his own publishing company. And he thought it would be a great opportunity to publish the books in the United States as one volume. So we were able to do that. And that volume, by current standards, has done relatively well, I think, for Stonebridge. But it went out of... we ran out of copies about a year ago, and in working with the rights around Gundam are so complex that it took over a year to get back to sign an extension to the publication contract. So that one novel, or the combined 3 novels, which is one book now, that will be reprinted, I believe, in the spring of next year. So that's very exciting for me that it will be available again, because there are some hardcore fans out there. And at one point, I have to say, it was very exciting to me because I would look on Amazon and I would see, even though it wasn't available, it was out of print, no copies available, there were actually vendors on Amazon that were asking over $2,000 for one copy. I couldn't get anybody to pay that much for the copy I had, but I tried.
The current price is used from $79.99, new from $100, going up to $343.
Well, that's a bargain compared to a year ago, because I kid you not, there was a brief period where some people were asking for a couple $1,000.
I believe it.
And I thought that was optimistic, but it was great to look at it. It was,
Yeah, I managed to snag a copy, I think, just before that point when, the price was rising, and I nabbed it for, I think, $40 or $45. And I was like, I have to get it now before it becomes, priced out of my tax bracket. And
well, you should have turned around and tried to sell it for $1,000 on eBay. You might have gotten it. You never know.
Absolutely
but
not.
It's very exciting to me. It's very exciting to me that it will be made available again in the spring. So
that's great.
Yeah, it's great because there are a lot of Gundam fans out there, and I'm one of them, of course. And the idea that Tomino's original vision was not so accessible was always disappointing. So it'll be great to have the book available again.
Yeah, and just to point fans to the fact that Tomino's original vision rather different than how it actually was.
Yes, but we won't give away the ending of the novels because it might shock anime fans too much, and they might choke on their coffee or whatever, their cola or something. But it's very different. Something to look forward to if you haven't read the stories.
Absolutely, yeah. I love it. It's just for kind of imagining, how the series would have gone if they had gone in that direction. And I know that was just sort of the beginning of where Tomino kind of wanted the story to go. And, just imagining that is great for a couple of Saturday afternoons, imaginings.
Yeah. There's all kinds of alternate universes out there. And actually a lot of alternate universes I think have already been explored for the Gundam series. It's become so diverse. But it's fascinating to see how at least at one point, Tomino himself envisioned his original story. Yeah,
it is fantastic, and now we're finally getting Turn A Gundam legally over here. It's fantastic.
Yeah. It's all good. Gundam good. Gundam is good. Gundam rules.
Thank you for saying that, because I believe that very strongly. I'm actually right now going through and posting reviews of every Gundam animated work. And it's just been tremendous fun watching reactions to that, and
it's also a lot of work.
There's a lot.
A lot. Yeah. That's an important thing you're doing. That's good. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I greatly appreciate you saying that, because it's people have heard of Gundam, and I think you hear bits and pieces of the breadth, but when you actually go through and Gundam, Zeta, Double Zeta, and all the way through, it's just tremendous how much is out there.
It's like, holy cow! Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
And I think you've been an important part of that.
It was a thrill. It is a thrill.
I can imagine. So, what else are you working on right now, and what else is coming out soon?
Right now I'm actually working on a book of my own, which has nothing directly to do with manga or anime, but a lot to do with popular culture. It's a book, it's a history book, a non-fiction book, about a group of acrobats, Japanese acrobats, who came from Japan in 1867 to the United States and went to Europe. And they were the first exposure that Westerners had really to Japanese popular culture. So my book is about that, and I'm really excited by that. And hopefully that'll be out next year. So something for people to look forward to, especially if they like to know about how some of these very early pop culture interchanges occurred, and especially if they like circus and if they like performing arts. And actually in Japan there's a manga artist who actually created a work called Jing, which is very popular right now, and it was made into not an anime work but into a live action drama. And he actually incorporates a couple of the acrobats in one of his stories. So you probably see it in anime at some point, or aspects of the story. So it's something I'm obsessed by, and I've been working on for a while, and I'm having a blast. It's just a lot of fun. So I hope people will, when they read it, I hope they'll enjoy it as much as I have enjoyed learning about these early popular culture interchanges.
Oh, absolutely. That's fascinating. I mean, you got the whole Meiji Restoration going on, and everything else going on around the world. What a time!
It was an amazing time because the acrobats, they came over and they were still shaving their heads. They were wearing, the men wore, chomage, shaved heads, the top knot, and they were still wearing Japanese clothes and not eating meat, and different world, a completely different world.
My goodness. And see how far things have come.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being part of this. I could, continue talking on forever, but I don't want to take up too much of your time here. So, thank you so much for joining.
As you can see, I could probably talk forever too. So, thank you for allowing me to babble on, and good luck with your show. It's a great show.
Thank you very much. No, and we'll have to have you on and talk more in greater detail soon.
Thank you very much. I'd love to. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you very much.